I had carried lumber, equipment bags, free weights, moving boxes for friends who always seemed to live on the third floor of buildings with no elevator. I thought I knew what weight felt like. But nothing prepares you for the specific gravity of carrying a box that contains someone you loved. It doesn't just press down on your shoulder. It presses inward, through muscle and bone, somewhere past the physical, into the part of you that knows exactly what you're doing and cannot believe you're doing it. Marcus Webb was 33 years old. He had a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning in November while making coffee in his kitchen. He was found by his downstairs neighbor, an elderly woman named Patricia, who knocked because she smelled the coffee burning and thought he'd gone out and left the pot on. He hadn't gone out. He wasn't going anywhere. Marcus Webb was my best friend for 19 years. He was also the only person on earth who had ever actually believed in me at a moment when I had given him absolutely no evidence to support the position. I'm Caleb Rourke. I'm 32. I run the youth athletics program at the Millbrook Recreation Center in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a job I love in a way that still surprises me, because it was not the job I planned. The job I planned was professional baseball. I was a pitcher with a mid-90s fastball and a slider that broke like something personal at the plate, and I made it as far as Double-A before a torn labrum in my right shoulder removed me from the equation with the comprehensive efficiency of an eraser. I was 24. For approximately 8 months after the surgery, I was not someone you would have wanted to spend time with. I was also not someone I wanted to spend time with, and I lived inside that particular problem 24 hours a day. Marcus showed up. Every day, for 8 months, he showed up. Sometimes with food, sometimes without food, sometimes with a specific kind of silence that understood I didn't need conversation, just another human body in the room refusing to let me disappear completely. He never made me feel managed. He never made me feel like a project. He just kept being my friend with the steady, uncomplicated commitment of a man who had decided and didn't need to keep deciding. I never fully told him what that meant. I kept meaning to. I had plans to say it correctly on some future occasion that never specified itself. And then it was a Tuesday in November, and the coffee burned. The church was packed in the way that happens when someone dies before the world was finished with them. People from Marcus's job at the engineering firm, teammates from the recreational soccer league he played in, former college friends, family that seemed to arrive from every direction, and all of us standing in the specific dazed quiet of people who cannot reconcile the person we knew with the fact of his absence. I was one of 6 pallbearers, Marcus's 2 older cousins, 2 friends from college, and me. We had practiced the movements with the funeral director beforehand, how to receive the casket, how to carry it down the aisle, how to transfer it to the hearse, how to carry it again at the graveside. He made it sound procedural. It was not procedural. I focused on the casket. I focused on my feet. I focused on not doing anything that would require me to be helped. Because being helped felt like the one thing I could not survive, and I knew, with the complete certainty of a man who had spent 19 years learning his own weak spots, that if someone put a hand on my shoulder in the next 20 minutes, I was going to come apart in a church full of people and Marcus would have found it simultaneously hilarious and heartbreaking. We got through it. The service. The graveside words. The moment when the casket was lowered and the sky above the cemetery was the particular gray of late November in North Carolina, the kind of sky that isn't quite raining but isn't quite not, that hovers over things like it can't commit. I was standing at the edge of the gathering, doing the thing I had become very good at since the diagnosis came through, occupying space without actually being present in it. When I felt a hand close around my forearm. Not gently. Purposefully, I turned. Delphine Webb was 61 years old and 5 feet 2 inches tall, and she possessed, in the opinion of everyone who had ever encountered her, a gravitational field that had nothing to do with physical dimension. She had dark eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses, silver natural hair cut close to her head, and the composed expression of a woman who was grieving the worst loss of her life and had made a decision, specific and deliberate, about what she was going to do next. She was looking at me like she had something to say, and had been saving it for exactly this moment. Caleb, her voice was level, not cold, steady, walk with me. It was not a question. I walked with her. We moved away from the main gathering, along a gravel path between sections of the cemetery, toward a bench beneath a large pin oak that had dropped most of its leaves by now, but still held enough to give us the sense of being slightly apart from the world. Delphine sat. I sat beside her. For a moment, she didn't speak. She looked at the ground the way people look when they're assembling something carefully before they hand it to you. Marcus talked about you constantly, she said. You know that, I'm sure. We talked every few days, I said. He was my closest friend. I know what he was to you. She folded her hands in her lap. What I need to tell you is what you were to him, because he was specific about it, in the way that boy was always specific about the things that mattered most. She looked over at me steadily. He called me 2 months ago. Out of the blue on a Sunday afternoon, which wasn't unusual. Marcus called on Sundays. But this one was different. He said, Mom, I need to tell you something about Caleb and Danny, and I need you to know it in case something happens to me before I manage to fix it myself. I went completely still. Danny, Danielle Webb. Marcus's younger sister by 2 years. Structural engineer. Lived 40 minutes away in Durham. I had known her for 16 years. I had not allowed myself to know her in the way that counted for 12 of those 16, which was its own specific kind of discipline, and not one I was proud of. Delphine was watching my face with the calm precision of a woman reading a document she had already read before. He told me everything, she said. He said, Caleb has been in love with Danny for a decade, and he will never say a word because he doesn't think he's worth saying it. And Danny? She paused. The pause had weight. Danny stopped waiting for him to figure it out about 3 years ago, and it broke something in her quietly, and she has been very careful not to let it show because she didn't want it to cost her the friendship or my brother his best friend. Delphine reached into the pocket of her coat and removed a folded piece of paper. He wrote it down because he said I'd need to have it exactly right when the time came. She held the paper out. I took it. My hand was not entirely steady. Marcus's handwriting was the same as it had always been, left leaning, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had been told as a child to slow down and had taken it to heart. The paper said, in his hand, in blue ink, exactly what his mother had quoted, and beneath it, 2 additional lines I hadn't heard yet. The time to say something is running out. Not because of anything dramatic, just because Danny is a person who makes decisions and moves forward, and if Caleb doesn't show up soon, she is going to build a life that doesn't have room for him in the way that counts. She deserves better than waiting for a man to believe he's worth showing up. Mom, if something happens to me before I get this right, find Caleb. Tell him I told you. He'll understand what that means. I sat with that piece of paper in my hands, and the November air around us, and the sound of people in the distance saying goodbye to my best friend, and I thought about every Sunday phone call I had gotten from Marcus over the past decade. And I thought about how he had never once mentioned any of this to me directly, and I thought about what it meant that he had been carrying it quietly and trusted his mother to carry it after him. He had known I was disappearing from my own life. Again, still, and he had arranged for someone to find me. He set this up, I said. My voice came out strange. He prepared for the possibility, Delphine said carefully. There's a difference. He didn't intend to die. He knew himself. He knew that if something happened to him before he managed to say this to you directly, it would get buried. You would bury it. And then everyone would lose. I looked at the paper again. He'll understand what that means. I understood what it meant. Marcus had spent 19 years watching me either push things away or wait too long to reach for them. He knew my patterns better than I did. He had sent his mother into this cemetery with a folded piece of paper and a single sentence as the key that would unlock it. because he knew I would hear his handwriting in a way I couldn't ignore. It was the most Marcus thing he had ever done, which was a high bar. "Where is she?" I asked. Delphine didn't look away. She left early. She does that at family gatherings now. She comes, she contributes, she leaves before things get too still. A pause. She does it more since Marcus got sick. She doesn't like people to watch her feel things. She was close to him. He was her favorite person, Delphine said simply. The way you have a person who just understands you at the cellular level, without explanation required. That was Marcus for her. She looked at the pin oak above us. She is not doing well. She's doing a very good impression of doing well, which is different. I thought about Danny Webb at 12 years old, the first time I met her, sitting at the Webb's kitchen table with a library copy of a structural engineering textbook because she'd found it on a shelf at school and wanted to read it, even though she was technically too young to check it out. Marcus had rolled his eyes at his little sister in that specific way of older brothers who are secretly proud. I had thought the textbook thing was the coolest thing I'd ever heard. I had thought a lot of things about Danny Webb over the next 16 years that I had never said out loud. Delphine. I folded the paper and held it. "What do you want me to do with this?" She looked at me with an expression I recognized from the 19 years I'd spent at her kitchen table. The expression that said she was about to tell me something I needed to hear and wasn't going to apologize for the directness of it. "I want you to go find my daughter," she said. "Not today. Let her have today. But soon, and I want you to be honest with her the way you never were with my son. Which is not a criticism of you. Marcus loved you without reservation, whatever your shortcomings, but I am 61 years old, and my son is in the ground, and I have run entirely out of patience for people waiting to say the things that matter." She stood, smoothed the front of her coat, looked down at me. "He picked you for a reason, Caleb." She said it the way she might state a fact about architecture or weather. "He picked you and stayed with you for 19 years, and he was not a man who did things without reasons. You might want to think about what that means for what you believe about yourself." Then she walked back toward the gathering, leaving me on that bench with his handwriting in my hands and the gray sky above, with the specific sensation of a man who has just been handed something he cannot put back down. My colleague at the rec center, a former college soccer player named Reed, who functioned primarily as my conscience dressed in basketball shorts, found me in my office 3 days after the funeral staring at a scheduling spreadsheet I had not actually been reading for 40 minutes. "You look like a man who's trying to solve a math problem by not looking at it," he said. "I'm working. You're sitting." He pulled up a chair. "How are you, for real?" "I'm fine." "Caleb, I'm not fine." I looked up. I'm the standard version of not fine. I lost my best friend. I'm getting through it. I'm not in crisis. "There's something else," Reed said. Not a question. I had not told anyone about the conversation at the cemetery. It had been 3 days, and I had been moving through those 3 days with Marcus's paper folded in the chest pocket of my jacket, because I was not yet sure what to do with it, and I couldn't put it somewhere I wasn't. "His mom told me something," I said. "At the graveside." Reed waited. He was good at waiting, which was one of his most valuable qualities. "There's a woman," I said. "Marcus's sister. I've known her for 16 years. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, and Marcus knew. He knew. He told his mother before he died. He wrote it down. I pressed my hand flat against my chest, the outline of the paper through the fabric. He wrote it down and gave it to her in case something happened to him before he got to say it himself. Reed absorbed this. So he set it up from the other side of a brain aneurysm. From what was apparently a concern about the possibility of a brain aneurysm? Yes. That's either the most romantic or the most haunting thing I've ever heard. "It's both," I said. That was Marcus. He could cover multiple categories simultaneously. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the scheduling spreadsheet. I thought about Danny at 16, explaining to me and Marcus the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition wall using a model she had built out of balsa wood, and Marcus pretending to be bored, and me pretending to be less interested than I was. I thought about her at 26 at a birthday party for Marcus, standing in the kitchen doorway in a yellow dress, laughing at something someone said, and the specific way the thought I am watching someone remarkable had moved through me and then been put away in the compartment where I kept things I didn't act on. I thought about what Marcus's handwriting said. She is going to build a life that doesn't have room for him in the way that counts. I don't know yet, I said. Reed looked at me the way only people who have watched you for a long time can look. For the record, he said, the thing where you believe you're not worth showing up is not a personality trait. It's a habit. And habits can be broken. I looked at him. Did Marcus call you? Marcus texted me once, 18 months ago, and said, keep an eye on Caleb. He thinks he doesn't deserve things. He's wrong. Reed stood. His words, not mine. Though I agreed. I sat with that. Marcus had been doing this for a long time, building a net beneath me so quietly I had never noticed it was there. I called Danny on a Thursday evening 10 days after the funeral. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the rec center because I knew if I went home first I would find 14 reasons to do it tomorrow instead. She picked up on the third ring. Caleb? Her voice was careful in a way that Danny's voice almost never was. She was usually direct in the way that people are direct when they have excellent spatial reasoning and no patience for circling a point. The carefulness meant something. I know it's late, I said. I wanted to check on you. A pause. I'm fine. I know what fine means. Then why did you ask? I didn't ask, I said. You volunteered it. There's a difference. Another pause, and this one had a different texture. You sound like Marcus, she said quietly. My chest tightened. I'll take that. It was meant as a compliment, a breath. I'm not fine. I don't know how to be in a world that doesn't have him in it. I know that's not a unique experience and people survive it all the time, but I haven't developed the skill yet. Neither have I said. We were quiet together on the phone for a moment. It didn't feel empty. It felt like two people who were inhabiting the same difficult thing and had acknowledged it. Your mom came and checked on me last week, she said. This surprised me. My mother and Delphine Webb existed in each other's orbit through Marcus and me, but they weren't close. She did? She brought food. She sat at my table. She told me stories about Marcus as a kid that I hadn't heard. A pause. She's a good woman, your mom. She is. A beat. Danny, can I take you to dinner? Not to fix anything. Not to make some event out of it. Just two people who both lost him, getting food somewhere quiet. The silence was longer this time. When? She said finally. Whenever you say. Saturday, she said. Noon? Lunch is lower stakes than dinner. Lunch it is. Somewhere with good soup, she said. I've been eating a lot of soup, I'm not going to explain it. I know a place on Elm Street called Foundry. They do a white bean and rosemary that Marcus specifically. I stopped. A small sound from her side. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not. That tracks, she said. He sent me there for lunch 2 months ago. Said it was the kind of place that made you feel like things were going to be okay. Of course he did. Of course he had been there. Building the infrastructure of this before he was gone. Placing the stones in the path before either of us knew we were going to need them. I'll see you Saturday, she said. I drove home through the Greensboro dark and thought about the weight of caskets and the weight of waiting too long, and the specific peculiar grace of a man who had known me completely and loved me anyway and apparently spent years trying to hand me the future he could see that I was too afraid to reach for. Foundry was everything Marcus had apparently said it was. Brick walls, wide windows, a small open kitchen where you could watch things being made, and the white bean soup that arrived in a shallow white bowl and smelled like something you would eat at the table of someone's grandmother in the best possible meaning of that phrase. Donnie ordered it. I ordered it. We both looked at the soup and then at each other. He recommended the soup specifically, she said. He did. I picked up my spoon. Emergency soup. What? Nothing. A reference. I'll explain sometime. She looked at me with the particular expression I had spent 16 years cataloging, without acknowledging I was cataloging it. Danny Webb had her mother's eyes and her brother's precision, and something else entirely that was her own. A quality of attention that made you feel, when she was looking at you, that she was looking at exactly you and not a performance of you. She wore a dark blue crew neck sweater, and her hair pulled back, and no makeup, and the expression of someone who had decided, for this occasion, to arrive as herself and see what that cost. She looked, I thought, like someone trying not to be armored. It was taking effort. It was working. Your mother told me something, I said, at the graveside. She wrapped her hands around her soup bowl. I know, she said. I looked at her. She told you she was going to. She told me she had. After the fact. She kept her eyes on the bowl. She said she gave you the paper. She said you took it. A pause. She also said you looked like a man who understood exactly what he was holding. Did you know he wrote it down? No. Her voice was very level. I knew he knew. I didn't know the extent of it. She finally looked up at me. We had one conversation about 2 years ago. He pushed me about why I'd gotten quiet on a certain subject, and I told him the truth because Marcus had a way of making lying feel like more effort than it was worth. Something moved in her expression. He didn't say much about it at the time. He just said, "Okay. I've got it." And then he called your mother. 2 months ago, apparently. And wrote it down. And she stopped. That is so completely him that I can't decide whether to be grateful or furious. Both, I said. Cover multiple categories simultaneously. That was his entire thing. Her mouth did something, not a smile exactly, but the architecture of one. The place where a smile begins before it commits. He was always moving 12 steps ahead of everyone, she said. You'd think you were having a casual conversation, and then 6 months later you'd realize he'd been building something the whole time. He built a net under me for 19 years, I said. I didn't see it until it caught me. Danny looked at me for a long moment. He loved you very much, she said. Not in a complicated way, just completely, the way you love someone you've decided on. The restaurant moved around us. Plates shifted. A conversation at the next table rose and fell. Outside, Elm Street in the gray December light. I have to tell you something, I said. And I need to say it without dressing it up. Because I have spent a significant amount of time over the past 12 years dressing it up as nothing, and I don't want to do that anymore. Danny was quiet. She held her soup spoon without using it. I have known since I was 20 that I had feelings for you that weren't casual, I said. I didn't say anything because I was 20 and you were 18 and the timing was wrong, and then I was 24 and the baseball thing happened and I thought, I'm not someone who deserves anything good right now, so I will wait until I'm worth it. And then I was worth it, or thought I was, and 5 years had passed and it had become something I had decided not to name. And I kept not naming it. Every time you were in the same room, I chose the careful version, the safe version, the version that let me keep the friendship and not risk the rest. I stopped. She was looking at me steadily. There was nothing evasive in her face. I kept going. Marcus's paper said that you stopped waiting about 3 years ago. He was right that I would understand what that meant. I do understand what it means. It means I ran the clock out on something real, because I convinced myself I wasn't worth showing up for. I held her gaze. He believed I was worth it. His mother believes I'm worth it. I'm trying to get to a place where I believe it too. A pause. I'm not there yet. But I'm saying this now, without the careful version, because I am completely out of time for the careful version. The silence stretched between us. I had said too much. I had said exactly the right amount. Both were true. Danny was the person who decided which. I'm angry at you, she said. Not loud. Flat and clean, the way she built things, with precision and no wasted material. I want to be honest about that. Not screaming angry, just There are years I spent being aware of something and deciding it wasn't going anywhere, and then redeciding that every time I saw you, and that cost me something. I want you to know that it cost me something. I know, I said. That's on me. It is. She held my eyes. I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because Marcus spent his whole life watching both of us be careful in ways that didn't serve us, and he was right that it was a waste. She put the spoon down. I'm also angry that he's gone. I'm also grateful he did this. I'm also sitting here in a soup restaurant on a Saturday talking to you like I have a plan. And I don't have a plan. She exhaled. I'm several things simultaneously right now, and I need you to just stay at the table while I'm all of those things. I'm not going anywhere, I said. You historically go somewhere, she said. Not unkindly, just accurate. I know, I said. I'm aware of my record. I'm asking for a different one. She looked at me for a long time. I didn't fill the silence. I had learned, in the specific education of losing Marcus, that there are silences you earn by sitting still in them. I designed a pedestrian bridge last year, she said finally, over a retention pond in Chapel Hill. It's a small project, not remarkable on paper, but I designed it so that when you walk across it at a certain time in the afternoon, the light off the water hits a specific angle, and for about 20 minutes, everything looks generous, like the world is being kind to the people in it. She picked up her soup spoon. Marcus came and stood on it at sunset 3 months before he died. He texted me a photo of his shadow on the water and said, "You built something that makes people feel like things are going to be okay. That's the only review that ever mattered to me." She paused. "I want to show it to you sometime. If you want." "I want," I said, immediately and without qualification. The corner of her mouth lifted. Just the corner. "Don't make promises before lunch is finished," she said. I'm a difficult standard. I know. I've been watching you hold that standard for 16 years. And I think the men who called it difficult were measuring wrong. She held my gaze for one long moment. Then she looked down at her soup bowl. "Your soup is going cold," she said. Marcus would say the soup waits for no one. Marcus would say exactly that. We ate. The weeks that followed were not a movie montage. They were ordinary in the specific valuable way that ordinary things are. The way you only understand when you've been reminded that ordinary time is not guaranteed. We texted in the way of two people who both thought carefully before sending. She sent me a photograph of a structural detail she found beautiful on a building in Durham. I sent her a photograph of one of my kids at the rec center, 9 years old, hitting a ball she had been trying to hit for 3 weeks. Her whole body in the swing, nothing held back. Danny wrote back, "That's the whole thing, right there." We had lunch at Foundry again. Soup again. Different soups, which prompted a detailed and completely serious conversation about the architectural integrity of a broth versus a cream base that I would not trade for anything. She came to the rec center one Thursday afternoon because she was in the neighborhood and curious. She stood at the edge of the gymnasium and watched a group of 12-year-olds run a baseball drill I had designed, a footwork sequence for fielding ground balls that was based on movement principles I'd learned in the minors. She watched without commentary until the drill ended. Then she said, "The pattern they're running, that's a load distribution problem. You're teaching them to transfer force efficiently without losing structural integrity." I stared at her. "What?" she said. "You just described baseball footwork as structural engineering. Is that wrong?" "It's exactly right," I said. "I've been coaching that drill for 6 years and never had language for why it works." She looked pleased in the way she always looked pleased, not performatively, just inwardly, a small private satisfaction. "You're good at this," she said. "With them. You show them things the way someone shows a person something they actually want them to see." "I learned it from someone." "Marcus? He was part of it." I looked at her. "You were part of it too, watching how you explained things to people who were willing to learn." I paused. "You were always patient with people who were willing." She was quiet for a moment. And the ones who weren't? Those you handed a code violation. That got me the laugh. The real one. Sudden and unguarded. The one that didn't come with management. Two of the 12-year-olds looked over and then went back to what they were doing with the complete lack of interest of children who have already registered adults as ambient. Come on, I said. I'll show you the weight room. The kids raised money for a new rack system, and it's the structural pride of the whole building. She followed me, and her shoulder brushed mine in the doorway, and neither of us mentioned it, and neither of us stepped away. I visited Marcus's grave for the first time since the funeral on a Saturday morning in January. It was cold and very clear. The sky the hard blue of a day that has decided to be honest about winter. I brought nothing. I didn't know what you brought to something like this. I stood in front of the headstone and thought about 19 years. I thought about the 8 months after my shoulder, and Marcus in my apartment with takeout and silence, steady as load-bearing structure. I thought about every Sunday call. I thought about him at Foundry with Danny's soup in front of him, building another piece of something he intended to hand off. I thought about what Delphine had said. He picked you and stayed with you for 19 years, and he was not a man who did things without reasons. I took Marcus's paper out of my jacket pocket. It was soft along the fold lines from weeks of carrying it. I read it one more time, although I had it memorized by now the way you memorize things you've read in the dark. I'm not going anywhere, I said out loud to the headstone. It felt less strange than I expected. I know that's the thing you were most worried about. I'm working on it. A pause. She showed me a bridge she built. It does what you said it did. Makes the world look like it's being kind. I folded the paper again. I don't know what happens next. I'm going to stop treating that as a reason not to show up. The sky stayed very blue and said nothing, which was the right answer. I texted Danny from the parking lot of the cemetery without planning to. He's good. I think he's good. 3 minutes later, I know. I went in October. I brought soup in a thermos because I didn't know what else to bring and I figured it couldn't hurt. I sat in my car and looked at that text for a long time. That's the most Danny thing I've ever read, I wrote back. He would have loved it. He did, I think. The thermos tipped over and I had to clean it off the headstone, and I spent 10 minutes on my knees in a cemetery with paper towels apologizing, and I swear I heard him laughing. I laughed in the parking lot of a cemetery on a cold January morning. The laugh came from somewhere real. Can I take you to dinner? I wrote. Not lunch. Dinner, with the full acknowledgement that it's higher stakes and I'm asking on purpose. The response took 4 minutes. I counted. What day? Friday, I wrote. I have a site visit until 6, she wrote. Pick me up at 7. Somewhere that's not soup. Done, and Caleb. A pause before the next text came. Don't overthink the shirt. I read that twice. Then I wrote, Marcus told you about the shirt thing. Marcus told me everything about you. His words, not mine. Another pause. He was right that I would find it useful. I drove home through the January streets with the heater going, and the specific unreasonable happiness of a man who has been found by someone who was looking for him before he knew he was lost. Friday arrived the way important Fridays do, with me in the wrong version of myself at 6:45 and the right version by 6:55. I picked her up at 7. She came to the door in dark jeans, brown leather boots, a cream-colored blouse under a blazer, and the expression of someone who had made a decision and arrived at it cleanly. She looked at my jacket. Good choice, she said. Marcus would have opinions. He would have taken all the credit, she said. He earned most of it. We went to a restaurant on Fisher Avenue with low lighting and a menu that changed seasonally and food that arrived without vertical stacking, which was a requirement I had developed a strong personal opinion about. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, and Danny ordered a glass of Malbec, and I ordered the same, because she described it as a wine that tasted like a decision had been made. And I could not improve on that framing. Over dinner, she told me about the Greenway project she was designing for the city of Durham, a half-mile corridor connecting two neighborhoods that had been separated by a highway overpass since 1971. She talked about it the way Marcus had talked about the things he cared about, with the specific animation of someone who has thought deeply about something and found that the more they thought about it, the more there was to find. You're building a bridge between two things that were cut off from each other, I said. That's the whole job, she said. That's always the job. She looked at her wine. Marcus used to say I was in the business of repair. I used to correct him and say I was in the business of design. A pause. I think he was right. I think it's both. He was usually right, I said. Annoyingly, she met my eyes. I told my mom I was having dinner with you tonight. What did she say? Danny's expression shifted into something warm and exasperated at the same time. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "Good. Tell him I expect him at Sunday dinner within the month. I'm making his mother's mac and cheese recipe, and I'd like it to land in its correct recipient." She tilted her head. She and your mother apparently shared a recipe. My throat tightened. My mother and Delphine Webb, who orbited each other through the gravity of two sons who were best friends, exchanging recipes across the network that Marcus had quietly maintained. Another strand of the net. When did they start talking? I said. According to my mother, Marcus gave them each other's numbers 2 years ago and suggested they have lunch. He told your mother apparently that she and Delphine were the two women in his life who were most likely to understand each other and least likely to have met without intervention. Danny picked up her wine. Your mother went to his funeral and didn't tell you she knew my mother well. She was protecting me, I said. I wasn't in a condition to receive it. You weren't in a condition to receive a lot of things, Danny said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. No, I held her gaze. I'm working on that. She looked at me across the table in the low restaurant light. I'm not going to make this easier for you, she said. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to smooth my edges or pre-apologize for my standards because you had a late start. You should know what you're agreeing to. I know what I'm agreeing to, I said. I've been watching your standards for 16 years. And I think they're accurate, I said. I think you know exactly what things should be able to hold and you don't accept less than that. In structures or people. I looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to change that. I'm telling you I want to be something that holds. Her hands were on the table between us. Not extended, not pulled back, just present. That is an absurdly good answer, she said. I had time to work on it. Was it that obvious I was going to ask that? Danny, I've been paying attention to you for 16 years. I know when you're testing load capacity. She put her hand on the table, palm up, not theatrical, not announced. Just placed, like a stone set in mortar. Then hold, she said quietly. I put my hand in hers. Her fingers closed around mine and she looked at our hands on the table with the expression of an engineer verifying that something she designed actually bears the weight she calculated it for. It was the best thing I had ever been part of. We walked after dinner along a stretch of the greenway she was designing, or would be designing. It was still concrete and edge damage in January, still the before. She walked it slowly, narrating to herself as much as to me, pointing at where the plantings would go, where the path would widen, where the light would land in the evening when the trees were in and the angle was right. How do you see it? I said. The finished version, when you're looking at the unfinished one. She thought about it. You train yourself to hold both versions simultaneously. What is and what will be. The gap between them is where the work is. I thought about Marcus at 22, coming to my apartment 2 weeks after the diagnosis I had received about my shoulder, sitting on my floor because there was nowhere else to sit, not saying anything for a long time. And then saying, "This is the before. You're going to be fine. I know what the after looks like." I had not believed him. He had been right. Marcus did that, I said. He could hold both versions. He could, Danny said. She was quiet for a moment. He held both versions of you for 19 years, the one you were and the one he knew you could be. A pause. I think that's what love actually is, when you strip everything else away. holding the version of someone that they can't hold yet. We stopped walking. The greenway path ran ahead of us, incomplete and real, the concrete giving way at its edges to the roots of things that were going to grow here. He held a version of me I didn't believe in, I said. He held a version of us, she said. Both of us. She turned to look at me directly and left us instructions. I thought about the paper, still folded in my jacket, about Delphine on the bench under the pin oak, about the soup at Foundry, the bridge at sunset, the thermos tipped over a gravestone, about Reed's voice. He texted me and said Caleb thinks he doesn't deserve things. He's wrong. About two mothers who had lunch together because a man who loved them both thought they ought to know each other. About every stone Marcus had placed in this path before either of us knew we were going to walk it. He built this, I said. He did, she said. We have to do the rest. I reached for her hand on the empty greenway in January, in the city where two neighborhoods had been separated for 50 years and a bridge was coming, and she let me take it with the specific intentionality of a woman who does not do anything by accident. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I know that's the thing I needed to say, and kept not saying. I'm saying it now. Danny looked at me with her mother's eyes in the winter light. Say it like you mean it for years, not for tonight. I mean it for years, I said. That's what I'm telling you. I'm not interested in the careful version anymore. She stepped toward me, and the space between us changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but the way a structure settles into its foundation, finally, decisively, with the quiet certainty of something that has found where it belongs. She kissed me in the middle of the unfinished greenway, on the concrete that was going to be something beautiful in the spring, and I held her the way you hold something you have waited a long time to understand was yours to hold. When she pulled back, her forehead rested near my jaw for a moment. He would be insufferable about this, she murmured. He would be magnificent about this, I said. She laughed against my shoulder. The greenway was empty and cold and full of things about to grow. 2 months later, Marcus's mother held Sunday dinner. My mother drove over from Winston-Salem. Delphine made the mac and cheese. Reed came because Danny had met him once, decided he was necessary, and invited him before asking me, which was so structurally correct that I could not argue with it. At one point during dinner, Delphine reached across the table and placed a folded piece of paper in front of me. I looked up. He wrote more than one, she said. That was for the graveside. This one was for after. Her eyes were steady. He said to give it to you when I thought the time was right. I unfolded it. Marcus's handwriting. Blue ink. Left leaning and deliberate. Caleb, if you're reading this, you showed up. I knew you would. It just took you a while to believe you were allowed to. A line break. Then stop keeping track of what you cost. Start keeping track of what you build. Those kids you coach, the things you photograph, the people you love when you actually let yourself. That's the ledger that matters. Another line. You were the best friend I ever had. The next 19 years are yours. Go use them. And then, at the bottom, in smaller letters P.S., the soup at Foundry was your idea first. I found the place years ago, but I was saving it for the right moment. You would have loved it from the beginning. I looked up from the paper. Danny was reading my face the way she read structural drawings, carefully, specifically, not missing anything. Across the table, both our mothers were talking about something that had nothing to do with any of this and everything to do with all of it. I refilled my water glass. I looked at the room. I thought about the weight of caskets, and the weight of waiting, and the weight of a man who had held two versions of my life simultaneously for 19 years and left me the blueprint for the one I hadn't started yet. I folded the paper. I looked at Danny. He says the soup was my idea first, I said. She looked at me over her glass. Was it? I don't know. But he wanted me to think so. She shook her head slowly, in the specific fond exasperation of someone who has spent a lifetime loving a person who was always 12 steps ahead. He gave everyone the version of events that would help them most, she said. That was entirely him. Yes, I said. Outside, the February light was running out. Inside, the table was warm and full and entirely, stubbornly alive. I put Marcus's paper in my jacket pocket, where it would stay for a long time, softening along the folds, carried close. I thought about what he had said. The next 19 years are yours. Go use them. I looked at the room again. At my mother and Delphine deep in conversation. At Reed helping himself to a third serving without asking, which was the most Reed thing possible. At Danny beside me, close enough that her shoulder touched mine, looking at me sideways with the half-smile of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. I picked up my fork. I stayed.